Welcome, fellow seekers of the macabre, to a new episode of Grim Memoirs. I'll be your guide through the shadows while we embark on a journey that blurs the line between nightmare and reality. In the heart of darkness lies a collection of horror films that echo with the ghostly whispers of true stories. These tales are not mere fiction. They are the harrowing simulacra, if you will, of the sinister and the unrelenting, the stories that have clawed their way from the depths of the human experience to the silver screen. As we peel back the layers, remember what you are about to witness is not fantasy. As I'm sure you all have come upon one or two videos about horror movies based on true events, here's a not-so-usual top 10 horror movies based on real-life stories that'll make your head spin and your heart shudder. Let us proceed with caution, my intrepid companions. We've been warned. Number 10. The Exorcist. Now I know what I said about the list being contrived by not-so-known-to-be in these lists movies, but we cannot possibly begin today's countdown without the horror movie par excellence, The Exorcist. Not only that, but its backstory and the real-life events which it was based on are even more disturbing than the movie itself. Thus, it can't be absent in this episode. The movie is based on the 1971 book by William Blatty, who was inspired to write the novel after reading about the case of Roland Doe while he was a student at Georgetown University. While it's a fact that the movie is clearly dramatized for cinematic purposes, its true origin story is just as chilling. The story of Doe goes like this. In March 1949, newspapers reported that a 14-year-old boy known as Robbie or Roland Doe was possessed by something sinister and that certain priests performed an exorcism on him. The boy, raised in a German Lutheran family, was no stranger to the paranormal things in life. After asking for an Ouija board for his birthday, his Aunt Harriet gifted him one. After she passed away, the boy began to experience creepy and abnormal things around the house, rattlings on the walls, strange noises, and flying objects. There are many of these instances the movie recreates in hidden details. After the death of his aunt, Roland's family tried to contact her, but this led to scratches all over Roland's body and bed. Neither moving to another place, nor an impromptu Catholic baptism which sent Roland into an unbridled rage changed their situation. Roland's family contacted every expert, all leading to a dead end, including a stint with a psychiatrist. After getting no answers, the family finally received help from Father Raymond J. Bishop, and multiple exorcisms were performed on the poor lad. The exorcism that inspired the movie had to be stopped early, because Roland allegedly ripped off a piece of mattress spring and threw it at the priest. A few days later, Roland started getting red scratches, with a mark spelling out the word Louis. This alerted the family to go to St. Louis University, where he was introduced to Father Walter H. Halloran and Reverend William Bowdern, who also performed an exorcism on the boy. When Bowdern left a crucifix under Doe's pillow, the family saw the furniture flip over, Roland's mattress shaking uncontrollably, and the crucifix pushed to the end of the bed. While the 1973 movie is based on a true story, one thing it doesn't get right is just how many exorcisms occurred and at how many different locations. Roland Doe received exorcisms at home, Georgetown University Hospital, and the Alexian Brothers Hospital. With each exorcism, Roland Doe allegedly spoke in Latin, urinated, vomited, spit, and spoke in a deep and unfamiliar voice. Doe's last exorcism was performed with the help of priests Walter Halloran and William Van Roo, and Halloran got his nose broken at some point during the ritual. Nevertheless, the priests claimed that this final attempt was successful. So, what really happened to the boy in the real-life story? There has been much mystery surrounding Roland Doe. Over 75 years later, experts believe that the real exorcist victim is Ronald Hunkeler, a former NASA engineer who helped with the 1969 moon landing. Hunkeler died of a stroke just a month shy of his 86th birthday in 2020, passing away at his home in Marysville, Maryland. After the series of exorcisms that Hunkeler allegedly went through as a child, he had an incredibly successful career as an adult working for NASA. Not many people knew about his secret identity, except for a few close friends, academics, as well as the Jesuits who knew the priests who performed the exorcism. According to his partner, Hunkeler was always very worried that his co-workers would find out and would even leave his home every Halloween, terrified that someone would harass him after it came out that The Exorcist is based on a true story. Hunkeler retired from NASA in 2001 after 40 years. Number 9. 10 Rillington Place. This 1971 biographic film tells the story of British serial killer John Christie and his horrible crimes in the terrace house at the address the movie is named after. What's even more baffling is the fact that an innocent man was executed for 2 of his crimes in one of the most shocking cases of judicial failure in modern British history. Prior to the notorious murders, Christie had a criminal record including convictions for theft and violence. He had also been accused of assaulting and attempting to strangle a woman. Over a span of 10 years, John Christie murdered 8 people starting in 1943, including his own wife, then stashed their corpses inside his London home. Christie's modus operandi involved luring women to his home under various pretenses, rendering them unconscious with domestic gas and strangling them. Some were even discovered with evidence of sexual assault after death. He would often claim that he could perform abortions, exploiting the desperation and vulnerability of his victims. 2 of Christie's victims were Beryl Evans and her baby daughter Geraldine, who along with Beryl's husband Timothy Evans, were tenants at 10 Rillington Place during 1948-49. This case sparked huge controversy after Evans was charged with both murders, found guilty of the murder of his daughter and hanged in 1950. Christie was a major prosecution witness. When his own crimes were discovered 3 years later, serious doubts were raised about the integrity of Evans' conviction. Christie himself subsequently admitted killing Beryl, but not Geraldine. It is now generally accepted that Christie murdered both victims and that police mishandling of the original inquiry allowed Christie to escape detection and enabled him to commit a further 4 murders. In January 2003, the Home Office awarded Evans' half-sister Mary Westlake and his sister Eileen Ashby ex gratia payments as compensation for the miscarriage of justice in his trial, and in 2004, the High Court acknowledged that Evans did not murder either his wife or his child. Number 8. Open Water. This 2003 survival horror film about 2 scuba divers who are left stranded on open water after their tour boat leaves, sadly enough, is based on the real story of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Tom and Eileen Lonergan disappeared during a scuba diving trip in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia in 1998. The Lonergans were American tourists traveling from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. On January 25, 1998, they joined a scuba diving tour with the Outer Edge Dive Company at St. Crispin's Reef, which is part of the Great Barrier Reef. Geoffrey Nern, the boat's skipper, led the way as they set out to their destination 25 miles off the coast of Queensland. After arriving, the passengers put on their diving gear and jumped into the Coral Sea. That is the last clear thing that can be said about Tom and Eileen Lonergan. What one could imagine is that, after a scuba diving session of about 40 minutes, the couple break surface to find themselves alone, surrounded only with infinite blue water. Tragically, a head count error occurred, and the tour boat departed without realizing that Tom and Eileen were still in the water. The couple's disappearance went unnoticed until 2 days later, when their belongings were found on the boat, and it was discovered that they were missing. The search and rescue operation began immediately, but it was hampered by the vast and deep waters of the Great Barrier Reef, and also the time it took to the crew to notice they were missing. Rescue members found some of Lonergan's diving gear washed up ashore. This included a dive slate, an accessory used for making notes underwater. The slate had the following words, quote, "To anyone who can help us. We have been abandoned on Agincourt Reef, 25 January 1998, 3 p.m. Please help us, come to rescue us before we die. Help." End quote. On the course of the aftermath, There was some speculation that they staged it, or that perhaps it was a suicide or even a murder-suicide. Tom and Eileen's diaries had disturbing entries that added fuel to the fire. Tom seemed to be depressed. Eileen's own writing was concerned with Tom's apparent death wish, writing 2 weeks before their fateful trip that he wished to die a, quote, quick and peaceful death, and that Tom's not suicidal, but he's got a death wish that could lead him to what he desires, and I could get caught in that, end quote. However, their parents disputed this suspicion and said the entries were taken out of context. The general consensus was that the couple was left dehydrated and disoriented, leading to either drowning or being eaten by sharks. Needless to say, despite extensive efforts, the Lonergans were never found alive. It is believed that they drowned or succumbed to other dangers in the ocean. Their disappearance brought attention to safety procedures in the scuba diving industry, leading to changes in protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. In a preceding court case, Coroner Noel Noonan charged Nern with unlawful killing. Noonan said that, quote, the skipper should be vigilant for the safety of passengers and ensure safety measures are carried out. He added, when you combine the number of mistakes and the severity of the mistakes, I am satisfied a reasonable jury would find Mr. Nern guilty of manslaughter on criminal evidence. Nern was found not guilty though, but the company was fined after it pled guilty to negligence, which caused them to go out of business. Number 7. Devil's Knot. Devil's Knot is a 2013 biographic movie which centers around the controversial trial of 3 teenagers, known in real life as West Memphis 3, and their barbaric killings of 3 children in the early 90s. The West Memphis 3 refers to 3 men, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, who were convicted in 1994 for the murders of 3 young boys in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1993. The victims, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were found dead in a wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills. The case gained widespread attention due to allegations of wrongful convictions, concerns about the reliability of the evidence, and the possibility of a miscarriage of justice. The prosecution argued that the murders were part of a satanic ritual, and Echols, Baldwin, and Miskelly were accused of being involved in the killings. Jesse Miskelly Jr., with a lower IQ, confessed to the crime after hours of police interrogation. His confession, however, was inconsistent and lacked corroborating evidence. Despite no physical evidence linking the West Memphis 3 to the crime scene, Echols, Baldwin, and Miskelly were found guilty. Echols received the death penalty, while Baldwin and Miskelly were sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, the case attracted attention from supporters who believed in the innocence of the accused. Numerous documentaries and books, including the Paradise Lost trilogy, shed light on the flaws in the investigation and trial. The documentary suggested that the West Memphis 3 may have been wrongfully convicted and that the investigation was biased against them. In 2011, after years of legal battles and new DNA evidence, the West Memphis 3 reached a plea deal known as the Alford plea. This allowed them to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to potentially convict them. They were released from prison after spending more than 18 years behind bars. The case remains controversial, and the question of who was responsible for the murders of the 3 boys in West Memphis has not been definitely answered. Number 6. Scream. Every horror movie lover, and not only, has heard and probably watched this 1996 slasher horror starring Neve Campbell. The movie is a self-aware and satirical take on the horror genre, often regarded as a significant and influential entry in the slasher film subgenre. Only a few of you, however, will know that it was actually based on the Gainesville murders that happened in a span of a few nights in August 1990 in Florida. First, on the 25th, a Friday night, Sonia Larson and Christine Powell became the first murder victims. On Saturday, it was Krista Hoyt. On Monday, the 27th, it was another pair of roommates, Tracy Pauls and Manny Taboada. All of them were killed in their apartments. Hoyt's body was found propped up on a bed, bent over at the waist. Her nipples had been sliced off, and her severed head perched on a shelf on the other side of the bedroom. Some of the others were also mutilated. Every time, the weapon was a knife, never a gun. The investigation into the Gainesville murders sparked fear and panic in the region. The University of Florida, Santa Fe College, and local schools experienced heightened security measures, and students took precautions to protect themselves. In September 1990, police apprehended Danny Rowling in Ocala, Florida for an unrelated robbery. While in custody, Rowling confessed to the Gainesville murders and provided details that only the killer would know. Rowling had a troubled past with a history of criminal behavior and mental health issues. In 1994, Danny Rowling went to trial for the Gainesville murders. He was convicted on multiple counts of murder and sexual assault and was sentenced to death. Rowling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006, at Florida State Prison. The Gainesville murders had a lasting impact on the community, leading to changes in campus security protocols and increased awareness of the potential dangers faced by college students. The case has also been the subject of books, documentaries, and films, exploring the events and the impact on the Gainesville community. Number 5. Hounds of Love. Hounds of Love is a 2016 Australian film and a directorial debut for director Ben Young. It tells the story of predator couple John and Evelyn White, who roam the suburban streets of Perth, Australia, in search of their latest victim to kidnap and imprison. The film is actually based on the real-life murderous couple David and Catherine Burney and their infamous crimes referred to otherwise as the Morehouse murders. David Burney was born on February 16, 1951, and Catherine Burney on May 23. The couple lived in Perth, Western Australia. Between October and November 1986, they committed a series of abductions, sexual assaults, and murders. Their victims were young women who were abducted from various locations. Similar to the movie, they lured them into their car, took them to their home, and subjected them to prolonged sexual assaults before murdering them. The victims included Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, Nolene Patterson, Denise Brown, and lastly, Kate Moyer. The Burneys were caught when a potential victim, Kate, managed to escape and report the incident to the police. The police then discovered evidence at the Burney residence linking them to the other murders. In 1987, David and Catherine Burney were convicted of multiple charges, including murder and sexual assault. Both were sentenced to life in prison. However, their case took a particularly disturbing turn in 2005 when David Burney committed suicide in his prison cell. Catherine Burney remains incarcerated, serving her life sentence. The case of the Burney murders is remembered as one of Australia's most chilling instances of serial killings committed by a couple. It also led to changes in the legal system and public awareness regarding the handling of parole for violent offenders. Number 4. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Yet another film with exorcism themes that is based on the real-life events of victim Annalise Michel. Here's how the terrifying true events unfolded. The Michels, a deeply religious family, lived in Klingberg, a small town in Bavaria, West Germany. The father, a sawmill operator named Joseph, had once considered becoming a priest, and there were no less than 3 nuns in the extended family. So, in 1948, when Annalise's mother Anna gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, it was so disgraceful that when Anna and Joseph were married, Anna was forced to wear a black veil during the ceremony. From that point on, Anna insisted that she and the family atone for those sins and the sins of others. This was the world that Annalise was born into in 1952. Growing up, she was encouraged to be overtly devout, doing penance for the sins of the family that predated her. Mass was twice a week, and the girl's time was largely spent indoors praying instead of playing with other children. It didn't help matters that Annalise was a sickly child, having had measles, mumps, and scarlet fever at a young age, leading to physical and psychological ailments that plagued her into her teens. She began experiencing blackouts at the age of 16, going into a trance, walking aimlessly, and wetting her bed. At 17, she was diagnosed with grand mal epilepsy due to intermittent convulsions. It was around this time that she began seeing, quote, evil hallucinations during prayer, followed by severe depression and thoughts of suicide, encouraged by voices in her head telling her she was damned. As per the Telegraph, Annalise would be performing 600 genuflections in a day, leading to damage to her knee ligaments. She then barked like a dog for 2 straight days while hiding under a table, lapped her own urine off the floor, ate spiders, coal, and a dead bird's head, and screamed for hours on end. Her family wanted to bring Annalise in for further medical tests, but she insisted on an exorcism, and after 2 failed requests, a third was authorized by Bishop Joseph Stangl. Father Arnold Renz was appointed by the bishop to perform the exorcism, with the first rite taking place on September 24, 1975. The exorcisms, most of which were recorded, revealed allegedly numerous demons in Annalise seeking control: Lucifer, Cain, Nero, and others. The exorcisms continued with 1-hour-long sessions held secretly in the bedroom of her parents' house, where Annalise was often in need of restraining, either by holding her down or chaining her to a chair. The recordings during these sessions are, as the Telegraph describes them, terrifying to listen. Obscenities are screamed, a series of throaty gurgles mixed with inhuman growling can be heard, as well as demonic postulations about us mortals' inescapable passage in hell. 11 months before passing away, Annalise stopped receiving medical treatment. Her body started deteriorating from malnourishment and dehydration. Barely recognizable, Annalise became covered with bruises and bed sores. Her hair began falling out, and she had withered away to a mere 68 pounds. Finally, after nearly 70 exorcism sessions, Annalise passed away on July 1, 1976. Her parents were charged with negligent homicide, with a trial beginning on March 30, 1978. The recordings were played for the 3-judge panel and became key points for the defense. The prosecution, on the other hand, testified that Annalise's death could be attributed to epilepsy, mental disorders, and her extremely religious upbringing, which Professor Hans says added up to a, quote, spiritual sickness and heavy psychic disturbance, according to the Washington Post. Annalise's parents and the 2 priests that performed the exorcisms were found guilty but were given lenience, sentenced only to time served and 3 months probation. As for poor Annalise's tragic life and death, we may never know if she really was possessed, if you believe in these things, or if she was just mentally ill and the environment where she grew up in and the people she grew up with messed her up even more. Number 3. The Afflicted. The Afflicted is a 2010 horror thriller film that depicts a mother's merciless abuse towards her 4 children. Much to our horror, the film is actually based on the despicable crimes of Theresa Knorr. She was an American woman who gained notoriety for her involvement in the murders of 2 of her daughters. The crimes occurred in the 1980s, and the case shocked the public due to the brutality and sadistic nature of the acts. Theresa Knorr was born on March 14, 1946 in Sacramento, California. In the mid-1980s, she began a series of abusive actions against her children, particularly her daughters. She was reportedly obsessed with maintaining control over her family. In 1985, Theresa Knorr murdered 2 of her daughters, 20-year-old Susan and 16-year-old Sheila Sanders. The exact circumstances of the crimes are disturbing and involve torture and abuse. Susan was shot and burned alive, while Sheila was also shot. Their remains were later discovered in a remote area. The crimes came to light in 1993 when one of Theresa's surviving daughters, Terry Knorr Graves, reported the abuses and murders to the police. Terry revealed that she had been a victim of her mother's abuse as well and had managed to escape. The investigation led to the discovery of the remains of Susan and Sheila. Theresa Knorr was arrested and charged with multiple counts, including murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. In 1995, she was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case highlighted the devastating effects of severe domestic abuse and drew attention to the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals within families. The crimes of Theresa Noor have been the subject of various true crime documentaries, books, television programs, and movies, due to the shocking nature of the abuse and murder within her own family. Number 2. Compliance. This 2012 American thriller follows a restaurant manager who is tricked by a caller into coercing her employee into a harassing, demeaning, and ultimately exploitative position. Even more sinister, however, is the real event the movie is based on that happened in Mount Washington, Kentucky in 2004. The case is commonly known as the strip search prank call scam. The incident gains widespread attention due to its bizarre and troubling nature. The case highlighted the dangers of social engineering and the importance of being cautious when receiving instructions over the phone, especially in situations that involve personal security and privacy. The incident also prompted discussions about the responsibility of businesses and individuals in safeguarding against such scams. In April 2004, an individual posing as a police officer called a McDonald's restaurant in Mount Washington. The caller claimed that a female employee was suspected of theft and instructed the restaurant assistant manager Donna Summers to conduct a strip search of the employee, describing her as a, quote, young brunette wearing a red tie. The caller was convincing enough that the manager followed the instructions with unyielding compliance. The victim, Louise Ogborn, aged 18, was subjected to a strip search in the back office of the McDonald's. The caller continued to give detailed instructions, including having the victim perform humiliating and degrading acts. For 3 hours, Donna Summers, and later her fiancé, Walter Nix, did everything Officer Scott asked, even when his requests started getting more and more disturbing and depraved. Throughout this horrendous ordeal, Louise had been made to dance naked with her hands above her head, do jumping jacks and deep knee bends, sit on Walter Nix's lap, kiss him, and then perform oral sex on him. The entire incident was captured on the restaurant's surveillance cameras. It's disgusting to know that 2 other employees saw the events unfold and did nothing, reasoning that what was happening couldn't be wrong since it was instructed by a police officer. Even more appalling to think of the reasons why someone would go along with such demands, someone in Summers' place, that is. When asked, she responded that the caller sounded like a legit police officer, and that when she asked him why in any moment, he was always quick and had an answer for everything. Summers' fiancé, Walter Nix, also abused Louise by spinelessly complying to every demand of the caller and eventually forcing the victim to fellate him. The abuse ended when 9th grade dropout maintenance worker Thomas Sims refused to take over and made Summers to call her area manager. The scam was eventually uncovered and the caller was identified as David Richard Stewart, a former prison guard. Walter Nix was indicted on charges of sodomy and assault and jailed for 5 years. Donna Summers was initially suspended, then later fired, for violating a McDonald's rule barring non-employees from entering the office. A couple of weeks later, she was indicted on a charge of unlawful imprisonment, a misdemeanor. Louise Ogborn, who now has a 5-year-old daughter, suffered years of depression and anxiety, shifting from one antidepressant to another. She eventually sued McDonald's for $127 million, but later settled for $700,000 out of court. Stewart, a married man with 5 children, was identified after the police found that the call of Louise's abuse was made from a calling card bought at a Walmart store. They then studied the CCTV footage and arrested David Stewart on June 30, 2004 in Panama City. During his questioning by police, Stewart insisted he never had bought a phone card, but detectives found one in his home that had been used to call 9 restaurants in the past year, including a call to a Burger King in Idaho Falls, on the same day when that restaurant's manager was reportedly duped by a similar scam call. Police also found in Stewart's home dozens of applications for police department jobs, hundreds of police magazines, and police-style uniforms, guns, and holsters. This was thought to indicate that the suspect had fantasized about being a police officer. Stewart eventually was brought to Bullitt Circuit Court, where he pleaded not guilty to solicitation to commit sodomy and impersonating a police officer, both felonies, as well as soliciting sex abuse and unlawful imprisonment, both misdemeanors. He was released on $100,000 bond pending his trial in December 13. His bond was posted by his brother C.W. Stewart, a retired police officer from Cheektowaga, New York. If convicted, Stewart faced up to 15 years in prison. On October 31, 2006, however, he was acquitted of all charges. Both the defense and the prosecution attorneys speculated that a lack of direct evidence, such as a recording of the caller's voice, might have led to the jury finding him not guilty. David Stewart remained a suspect in similar cases throughout the United States. Police stated later that after Stewart's arrest, the scam calls stopped. Number 1. Snowtown Murders. The Snowtown Murders, or simply Snowtown, is a 2011 biographic film that centers around 16-year-old Jamie and his family and neighborhood dynamics that ultimately lead to a spree of unspeakable violence and murder. The film candidly and graphically depicts the protagonist's upbringing, and we are able to clearly see how he is influenced and coerced, even sometimes unwillingly, to commit the crimes he partakes in. Similar events have happened in the little town of Snowtown in South Australia between 1992 and 1999, a fact that makes watching the movie even more unsettling. On the 20th of May 1999, Snowtown made headlines for the first time in the town's history. Multiple missing persons reports led police to the town's former bank vault, inside of which they found 12 acid-filled barrels. Upon opening them, the police came across a most gruesome sight. The barrels contained the disintegrating corpses of 8 deceased people. 3 days later, 2 more bodies were found buried in a backyard in Salisbury North, a suburb north of Adelaide. The perpetrators, led by John Bunting, committed several murders and dismembered the victims, placing the remains in barrels. John Bunting, along with accomplices Robert Wagner, James Vlasakis, and Mark Hayden, targeted individuals they believed were undesirable, including those with perceived criminal or socially unacceptable behavior. The motives behind the murders included personal grudges, financial gain, and a twisted form of vigilantism. The killings were particularly brutal, involving torture and sadistic acts. The bodies of the victims were then placed in barrels filled with acid to decompose the remains and mask the smell. The barrels then were stored in various locations, including the disused bank vault in Snowtown. Victims of the Snowtown murders were often the friends and family of the murderers themselves. For example, Bunting murdered Wagner's partner, Vanessa Lane, after the two broke up due to her involvement in earlier murders. Other victims, including Gavin Porter and Thomas Trevelyan, actually lived with Bunting leading up to their deaths. Like Lane, Trevelyan had also assisted with body disposal in previous killings. In addition to murdering his alleged friends, Bunting was tried for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Suzanne Allen, whose body was found buried in the backyard of Bunting's former home. However, the jury was deadlocked and Bunting was never convicted for her murder. The crimes came to light in 1999 when, as mentioned, police discovered the barrels containing human remains. The investigation led to the arrest and subsequent trial of several individuals involved in the murders. Details of these violent crimes are really disturbing. Before killing the victims, Bunting would often record them reciting banking information as they were being tortured. At Bunting's behest, other men in the group would impersonate the victim or friends of the victim and take money for them or collect on welfare payments. Before he murdered Vanessa Lane, Bunting reportedly made her call her mother to tell her she was moving and didn't want any further contact. He then made her record all her banking information. According to reports, the men stole at least $95,000 just from victims' welfare benefits alone. That said, Bunting later stated the real reward for the murderers was the act of killing itself. He called the cash they got, quote, icing on the cake. During the police investigation, authorities recovered knives, saws, a double-barrel shotgun, rope, tape, gloves, pliers, clamps, cloth, and even a variac metallurgy tool used to administer electric shocks. In addition to the torture inflicted upon his victims, Bunting also demanded they call him God, Master, Lord Sir, and Chief Inspector. The trial for the Snowtown murders lasted nearly a year. To receive a lesser sentence, Vlasakis gave evidence to authorities and confessed to his role in the murders. Bunting and Wagner went to trial together and were reportedly so calm and cold when they spoke about the victims, 3 jurors had to walk away from the case. Bunting reportedly never once seemed remorseful for any of his actions. He even read a book during his sentencing. Mark Hayden had previously committed suicide in prison. Bunting was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole on September 8, 2003. As for his accomplices, Vlasakis was sentenced to life with a 26-year minimum, Wagner got life without parole, and Hayden got 25 years in jail with an 18-year minimum. As we come to a wrap of today's episode, we're reminded that oftentimes truth is far more perverted than fiction. The 10 movies we explore today are not just spine-tingling tales crafted by imaginative minds. They are narratives rooted in real-life events, making the horror all the more palpable. If you enjoyed this exploration of horror sprouted from reality, don't forget to like the video, share with fellow horror aficionados, and subscribe for more bone-chilling content. Let us know in the comments which real-life horror stories have left an indelible mark on you, or if there are any movies we missed that you'd recommend. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and may your nightmares be filled with nothing but the silver screen. Thank you for watching.